This is a story of the Cherokee removal. The Cherokee Nation was one of great wealth and prosperity. They had a thriving judicial system that was praised by Thomas Jefferson himself. They were also recognized as one of the 5 civilized tribes. However, the white settlers resented the Cherokee and wanted them removed. This is a story of triumph and tragedy. It is a triumph for Andrew Jackson and his government, who were successful in removing the Cherokee Indians from their lands through the Indian Removal Act. However, it was a tragedy for the Cherokee Indians, for they lost their ancestral homelands and suffered immense heartbreak on their march to Oklahoma. In 1785, the United States signed a treaty with the Cherokee Nation that established peaceful relations. This treaty, however, was broken. There was always tension between the white settlers and the Cherokee Nation. The settlers resented the Cherokee Nation, mainly because they wanted the land that the Cherokee Nation occupied. The Cherokee feared the white settlers because they worried they would try and kick them off their lands. These fears began to grow when in 1828 the pro-removal Andrew Jackson became president. George Washington's way of handling the tensions was to make the Cherokee Indians as much like white people as possible. Because of this, the Cherokee Indians began to participate in American society. Many became landowners and some even became business owners. The Cherokees became recognized as one of the 5 civilized tribes in the 1820s. Despite this, the Cherokee Indians were still despised amongst white settlers. These tensions escalated when the settlers learned that there was gold in Cherokee lands. In 1832, the state of Georgia expanded its power in order to nullify the Cherokee Nation's laws. The Cherokee Nation opposed this and took the state of Georgia to the Supreme Court in 1831. The state of Georgia believed so strong in state rights that it refused to send representatives to the Supreme Court. They demanded that the case be conducted in the courts of Georgia. However, the state of Georgia's requests were denied, and they eventually agreed to send a representative to the Supreme Court. The state of Georgia was victorious in the first case, which left the Cherokee Nation in the hands of the land-greedy people of Georgia. Fortunately for the Cherokee, they took the state of Georgia to court again in 1832 and were victorious. The courts granted the Cherokee Nation custody over their land. Despite the court orders, United States President Andrew Jackson refused to send troops to Georgia to protect Cherokee land. Instead, he ordered the U.S. government to construct the Treaty of Dakota, which would justify the eventual removal. The leaders of the Cherokee Nation announced that anyone who signed an agreement to give up Cherokee land would be executed. Despite this, the U.S. government was able to persuade a group of 100 Cherokee Indians led by Chief Major Rich to sign the treaty. These representatives were not elected by the Cherokee Nation. They were aware that they would be executed upon their return to Georgia by the Cherokee Nation for signing the treaty. Because of this, they signed death warrants. The Treaty of Dakota stated that in exchange for compensation, the Cherokee would give up their ancestral homelands to the U.S. government. These lands would then be settled by the white settlers. The Cherokee Indians would be relocated west of the Mississippi River to Oklahoma. However, not everyone supported the Indian Removal Act. For example, Davy Crockett opposed it, for he claimed that it was immoral and that it violated the agreement the government had made with the Native Americans in 1785. A treaty was signed in 1836. The Cherokee Nation called upon Congress to cancel the treaty, stating that it was illegal. However, their requests were denied. In 1838, under orders from President Andrew Jackson, troops were sent to Georgia to enforce the Treaty of Dakota. Only 2,000 Cherokee Indians left voluntarily. The Cherokee that refused to leave were either placed in military detention camps or were forced out with arms. Some of the Cherokee took up arms and attempted to fight off the army. This tactic did not work. The U.S. Army defeated them and many of the Cherokees fighting were killed. 11,500 Cherokee Indians were forced to walk the Trail of Tears. Of them, 4,000 died. Malaria was very common due to the amount of mosquitoes. Germs were spread due to poor sanitation. The Cherokee did not have a stable water supply. They drank from the fresh water sources they could find, which consisted of rivers, lakes, and streams. Often, there were no fresh water sources available, which led to death from extreme dehydration. John Brewitt described the conditions in his personal account. He stated that the cold was extreme, food was scarce, and he talked about the abuse the Cherokee experienced from the soldiers. Food was also a large problem as they had no stable food supply. The men would hunt when they could. During the winter, it was too cold to hunt, and the Cherokee had to survive on small daily rations. A large amount of them died of starvation. Due to these food shortages, many of the Indians were not able to meet their dietary needs and grew weak. Likewise, the clothing was inadequate for the cold, which caused many to experience hypothermia. Some of the elders gave their blankets to the sick children at the expense of their own health. The wagons they brought with them were the only source of shelter. Those who were not able to sleep in the wagon had to sleep on the floor. Another hardship was that the Cherokee were abused, harassed by the soldiers. The soldiers were sent with the Cherokee to make sure that they were traveling towards Oklahoma and that they didn't step out of line and rebel. They implemented very harsh rules that the Indians had to follow. For example, they were not allowed to bury their loved ones. The soldiers that wanted to grow cotton were particularly abusive. They derailed the Indian spirits in order to make sure that they would receive the land previously occupied by the Cherokee Nation. Many of the soldiers stated later in their lives that it was one of the worst things they were ever asked to do. Some of the Cherokee Indians began to face toxic mental states, and a few even committed suicide. In 1839, Chief John Ridge and his family were executed by the Cherokee Nation for signing the treaty. The Trail of Tears left an everlasting legacy. Because of it, the Cherokee Nation crumbled and fell apart. Cherokee Indians lost their identity. Much of the land, culture, and traditions that were precious to the Cherokee Indians were lost. After this event, many of the Cherokee Indians experienced intense trauma and flashback from the Trail of Tears. A large number of them suffered from irreversible psychological damage. After the Indian Removal Act was completed, Andrew Jackson stated, "Hopefully these aliens can adapt to American society and become civilians." What he means when he says this is that he hopes the American Indians lose their culture and envelop themselves in American society to become regular Americans. Some of the Cherokee Indians were able to adapt to American society. They became farmers and started businesses. The United States continued its suppression of Cherokee culture in the 1900s. They sent the children of the Cherokee Nation to boarding schools with the intention of erasing their cultural identity. They were whipped when they spoke their native language. They were also taught English and learned American customs. The Trail of Tears got its name because when the Indians cried, their tears dried up on the sand and formed into crystals. Many people have found ways to honor the Cherokee Indians' tragedy at the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee Cultural Center has a Trail of Tears exhibit. The Museum of Native American History hosts an annual art show honoring the Trail of Tears. In Oklahoma, they have an annual bike ride where riders ride the trail that was walked by the American Indians. Oklahoma has also begun to create graves to remember those that died on the Trail of Tears. What we can learn from this horrible event is the importance of being able to work with people who are different from you in order to come up with a compromise that is healthy for everyone.